All right, judges, we'll get going in just a minute or two as soon as we have our full team and all judges ready to go.
The full team's here.
Great. As soon as we get Bobbie and Emily back, I'll give you guys a quick read through of how we're going to do this, and then we'll get started. Great. We got Bobbie here and Emily.
I'm here.
Okay, awesome. All right, team. Congratulations for making it this far. Very quickly, this round will look very similar to how the previous rounds have looked. You will have 10 minutes to give your briefing. There'll then be 10 minutes for Q&A from the judges, and then 10 minutes for feedback. I will be using the same signs that we've used for all the earlier rounds. So 5 minutes, 1 minute, and out of time. And I will also use it in the chat. For Bobbie, this is SEPA's team, which is titled Couldn't Hack It 2.0.
By the way, I'm going to turn off my camera because she is definitely going to be distracting to you guys. So,
all right. Team, if you guys are ready, you're ready to start. You're good to go to start briefing.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, members of the National Security Council. Since my colleagues and I from the Cybersecurity Task Force last briefed you, the situation has evolved into a national security issue. We want to emphasize at this time that this is a geopolitical security crisis, and we have reason to believe that the cybersecurity attack can be attributed to both state and non-state actors. The NSC must use a multi-pronged approach to address this national security issue. First, we need to use the full-fledged intelligence resources locating the North Korean ship. The Department of State should work with security partners to find the ship, to include South Korea, China, India, and Australia, and we need to enact US Navy ships because this is the highest priority. Next, we need the FBI to launch a manhunt in the US to find people's militia using local and federal law enforcement. And we believe this is a medium priority. We also need to coordinate with security partners to locate the other non-state actors potentially involved in the security threat. My colleagues will further expand upon this. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. So I'm going to discuss what Sarah mentioned about our highest priority threat, which is the potential of a North Korea dirty bomb, which is now potentially at sea and unlocated. And this has been further confounded by the chaos in the area caused by the AIS malware issue, which Department of Homeland Security has recently attributed to North Korean activity as well. So our highest priority for the National Security Council would be to make a full-fledged effort to locate the vessel with the dirty bomb and to handle it. So to do that, we've highlighted a couple required actions that we can start immediately. The first one is activate 7th Fleet in Japan to start conducting basically location and interdiction operations on the possible merchant or the possible ship that has the possible dirty bomb. Included with that would be engaging with our strategic partners in the region, so that on a military to military level, so that is the Japanese JMSDF and the ROK Navy, and on a diplomatic level, discussing with those partners about increasing port security and domestic security in those countries as well. At home, domestically, we'll need to increase U.S. Coast Guard and Border Patrol presence on West Coast ports, and this includes increasing MARSEC levels in those ports to level 3, which we realize would cause substantial delays and disruption to operations, but this is our highest priority at the time. Additionally, on an international organization level, we would like to see some engagement on the United Nations level with our Secretary of State and our UN mission to really try to bring China into the fold on this as well, and have them potentially enable us in putting pressure on North Korea to stop this activity. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Veer to talk about another possible threat that we will be talking about, which is the People's Militia. Thank you.
Thank you. As outlined by Sarah, this is more of a medium priority for the National Security Council. Thanks to a report from CISA, we know that the APT group responsible for what we understand to be both the sabotage malware as well as the anti-AIS malware can both be attributed to a North Korean APT group. This certainly feeds directly into what Patrick was describing of a threat of a dirty bomb being used to smuggling through these highly congested areas around ports. At this time, it becomes an effort. There's a redoubled effort that needs to be done to bring ports back online, specifically ports like the Port of Osaka, which was already implementing and developing a new system to counteract the disruptions that have already been leveled in place. At the same time, just sort of pivoting slightly, there is a need to launch a full investigation against the People's Militia. This APT group has previously been confined to activities within the United States. However, their reckless actions in cyberspace have made it such that they need to be investigated and brought to justice by the full capabilities of the United States government. That includes that includes empowering the FBI to launch a full investigation, and even possibly having them placed on terrorist watch lists, as well as having their assets seized. They have connections in both Hong Kong as well as in the United States. We need to be focusing on containing them as much as possible. I'll now hand this over to Sarah to talk about a few more concerns.
Thank you, Veer. Another lower level concern that we have but still want to address is that there is high confidence that one of the buyers interested in buying the dirty bomb from North Korea would be a Hindu nationalist group going by the name of Saffron Flame. As they have previously expressed and committed violence towards the Pakistani military and civilian targets. This would be of concern to the US, just to make sure that the situation doesn't escalate in an already very volatile region. So to coordinate with Indian intelligence would be our recommendation. At this point of time, we would not recommend reaching out to Pakistani governments to let them know of this, just because of the situation and the volatility between the two countries. At this point, we would not recommend that, but coordination with the Indian government, specifically their intelligence, to better understand Saffron Flame would be recommended.
At the same time, just because we have a little bit of time, we'll also add on the fact that while this initially started off as an economic concern, as an economic crisis, we do want to keep in mind that the situation is still ongoing, and steps should definitely be continued to mitigate the economic threat. However, the National Security Council must be focusing on, really should be focusing on the threat of this North Korean dirty bomb. Thank you. I think we are standing by for your questions.
All right, judges, you have 10 minutes for Q&A.
Hey, this is Salila. First of all, thank you for your time and your preparation for this meeting today. Very much appreciated. I wanted to push on two things that came up during the briefing. The first was the potential plan to reach out to China as a potential enemy ally in this. Could you explain more about the benefits of doing that, given the longstanding relationship that China has with North Korea to the present day, and the sort of reliance that North Korea has on China? And I apologize if I misheard you. The second thing I wanted to ask more about in terms of pros and cons and sort of the analysis behind the recommendation to not engage Pakistan. Could you explain, how we would contain diplomatic or potentially intelligence sharing fallout if they find out that we are sort of unilaterally engaging with the Indians here, especially given our reliance on them, within the region for containing certain counterterrorism and other types of threats that have increasingly been migrating towards the cyber realm. So if you could expound on those 2 points, would really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'll take the first question about our policy to engage with China. So the U.S. has in the past, with talks with the Party of Five and all the North Korea nuclear de-escalatory talks that have occurred. China has been an essential member in those specifically because they have so much influence over North Korea. And at this point, given the current economic situation in the world with the malware crisis going on and the delays in ports, I don't think China wants any more destabilization to occur. And with the potential buyer of this dirty bomb going to somewhere as close as India, I don't see China being specifically keen on that happening. So we'd like to pressure, you basically use that leverage that China may have over North Korea, one of the few countries that seems to have that sort of leverage, to push them to basically stop the DPRK from making this action. Thank you.
It's also important that we have China on board, especially if we're conducting operations in the South China Sea. We don't want to further escalate the geopolitical situation.
And I will also just add on that there's precedence for this, where China has been instrumental in sort of de-escalating the North Korean involvement, especially with its nuclear weapons program.
And with regards to the question about not sharing information or not contacting Pakistan at this moment, there's only moderate confidence that this potential buyer is a Hindu nationalist group. So because of that, we'd want to engage first with the Indian government and have them do the investigation. They have much better knowledge than, yeah. And so then if they relay to us that it is a threat, to then coordinate with Pakistan as we see necessary, or to encourage India to do that themselves. But because of previous actions in 2018, with little information, Pakistan has reacted very hastily, or not even the government, but state actors within the government may have connections. Therefore, we'd not want to unnecessarily aggravate their already tense relations.
I've got a follow-up question to Salila's question. When we think about the potential implications to potential target areas, can you explain the anticipated consequences, and the level of confidence that we have in that range of anticipated consequences in Pakistan, India, and the United States?
Just to clarify, this is what are the anticipated consequences of us sharing intelligence with the Indian government?
The anticipated consequences that are aimed for by those transporting the dirty bomb.
Understood. Well, with regards to sharing, I think Sarah kind of addressed some of those, and I'll let her jump in if she needs to add on to that. Regarding the DPRK threat, in the event that a nuclear bomb, a dirty bomb, was available to the Saffron Flame organization, it would definitely pose a threat not only to India, Pakistan, but as well as China. It is a well-documented fact that both India and Pakistan are two nations that really cannot use nuclear weapons against each other, due to the fact that it will have an undue consequence on the other party due to the way that the winds move in that area. And so it would definitely be of severe concern that that we do not allow the situation to escalate.
This is Bobbie. I'm going to pivot the questions a little bit. If I understand what you're laying out, you have 2 high priority and 2 medium priority actions. Find the ship and bring ports back online being your 2 high priority, and your 2 medium priority being identify members of the People's Militia inside the United States, and then leverage appropriate law enforcement and other tools against them, and get more detail on the Hindu national group in order to increase the attribution, a potential attribution there. If I understand that correctly, can you tell me more what you intend to do in the bringing ports back online area?
We had previously proposed that we leverage FEMA funds to potentially work with private entities to rebuild the system. In each ports we were recommending that every individual ports apply for funding and then create a new system from scratch.
So you're handling the port issue only domestically?
We would then make the software open source so that international ports could gain access to it as well.
Veer, I think you're muted.
I apologize. The idea would effectively be, as Sarah mentioned, a public-private partnership to develop an effective, a short-term remedial software that can be made open source, and then that way applied to all the different ports around the world, whether they're in the United States or in Japan or Korea. At this point, we've definitely seen the shipping and the port industry stumble in terms of recovering. It's taken them. It's now been several weeks, and they still have not been brought back online, which means that as the U.S. government, we need to take a more proactive stance on solving.
I do have a question. If you were done, Bobbie, were you done?
Yes. Go ahead, Kurt.
Okay, so from what I've heard so far, you've mentioned the world's largest economy. We're involved. The second largest, which is China. The fastest emerging economy, which is India. Those are some pretty hefty potential impacts to the financial sector and the global economy. What type of considerations do we need to make, and what type of moves do we need to make in the U.S. to help address that?
We also discussed whether or not it might be necessary for the president to announce national emergency, which would unlock additional economic stimulus packages to shield the U.S. economy. And by further shielding the U.S. economy, that could have potential positive effects on the other economies.
Is there concern that doing something like that would actually have the opposite effect of like creating economic turmoil when you have like the highest level executive branch official and like the leader of the free market world declare something like that? Like, is there a less explosive option than something that is that high level that would provide that kind of economic containment and assurity that we would need?
Yeah, so in our previous briefings, we provided a couple of recommendations that were a lesser severity than that, and they included things like engaging with critical trade associations around the world to secure supply chain, so prevent supply chain disruption, and that includes things like international and domestic shipping industry associations to mitigate that supply chain. Also, we can implement and interact with the ICT Supply Chain Risk Management Task Force under CISA and DHS to help to approach that from a cybersecurity perspective as well. So there are definitely other things that we can do on a lower level that focus on specifically, making sure that supply chains stay open and that shipping continues to move.
Muted. All right, that's time. Thank you very much, team. You guys did a great job. We now have 10 minutes for feedback from the judges.
I'll say it really quick because my daughter's quiet. Absolutely fantastic job. I like the way you guys sort of laid it out. You also had a really good focus on the potential impact across these 4 countries. I like the fact that you thought to involve China, which is, I would say not good, not bad, but a great consideration considering how wide-reaching an economic impact this can have if things don't go as well as we would all hope. What I would like to have seen towards the end, and this is probably can go across multiple teams' feedback, is sort of, we had a lot of discussions, a lot of back and forth and so on. In the end, tighten it up with, so to sum it up, here are the top 3 things we need to do and the time frame in which we need to do it. We spoke a lot, but we need to activate this fleet in Japan by this date to make sure we have a good handle on this. We need to, and then just list them out so we can take all the information we've gotten and then opine on whether or not we agree with your recommendations.
Yes, I think it was really well done. I think the questions that I asked, they went to China, they went to India, they also went to, like, you know, how high do you really want to go here? Because it can, maybe you don't need to. And I think that when those questions were posed, you had responses that showed that either right away or previously you had those considerations in mind. And I think that when you are making recommendations that are neither good nor bad but carry risk, you should perhaps be a little upfront in justifying the recommendation. And if the time on the brief will not permit that, you can plant the seed by saying, we have underlying merits for this recommendation, which we are happy to address in any questions that you may have. Because if those questions exist, your audience knows that you are aware that there are risks and you are anticipating them. The other thing that I would say, and I think this is a real world bit of offering, is that just because a country or a company or an institution or a team or any sort of well-resourced entity has the capacity to do something doesn't necessarily mean that they should themselves do it. That carries risk, that carries responsibility, depending on the nature of the engagement. It can also carry resentment. And so I think that it's also strategically important to consider, are there other actors who can carry out our strategic goals under the radar? And something doesn't necessarily need to be front page news or like the most vocal person broadcasting something in order to be a successful recommendation. And it's also a resource constraint that involves a lot of bottlenecks with approvals that can sort of limit the effectiveness of what's truly desired to solve a problem in a global context. And I think that that advice is one that applies in the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, or anywhere. Like if you can resolve it quickly and efficiently at the working level, that's always a good outcome, and your superiors and those in command also appreciate that and see that as leadership as well.
So first off, great job. I really think you handled the range of issues put at you in a really complicated scenario really well. So please take this as sort of fine-tuning kind of feedback. I liked how you organized the material and really oriented us, as I know you've heard, anytime people are consuming a lot of information really quickly, you really have to ground them quickly on what they should be focused on. And here's the thing we want to, here's the background, here's the thing we want to accomplish, here's what we need to do in order to accomplish it. You made an assumption that everybody at the table had been at the table the last times you came. That is very rarely a good assumption to make. In one of these meetings, oftentimes a deputy will have come the last time, or so while the organization will be represented time and time again, it isn't always the same individuals, and you can't be sure that the content is exactly mapped. So something you've done before, don't delve deeply into it, and say, as we mentioned previously, there's this. Well, if you have questions, we're going to focus on the new information, or something of that sort. So that can be particularly helpful. I liked how you presented a number of the trade-offs. I think that was good. I think that some of some of the recommendations, I was sort of struggling with how they were achievable. Let's find the ship, right? Great, I agree, that's absolutely the recommendation. Moving the, activating the 7th Fleet is good. And now we're just gonna wander around until we find a ship that, you know, it's the, a little more detail would have given some of those a bit more, made them a bit more believable in this situation. The other thing that I think would have improved it, and it was in there in pieces, was what's your communication strategy? Who do you need to talk to? Why? Where? Right? We've got a lot going on. As Kurt pointed out, there are a lot of the developed and emerging economy impacts, the financial impacts, the shipping impacts. It's all of that. You've got to talk to the American people. You've got to talk to other members of the executive branch. You've got to talk to Congress. So what's that sort of communication strategy, and how do we keep it, to Celia's comment, how do we keep it at the appropriate levels? Hauling out the president every time isn't always the best answer in order to get the kind of interaction. But all of these are sort of fine tuning and incredibly good presentation. So thank you.
Is that all the feedback from the judges? If so, we have some more time for questions from the competitors to the judges if they have any.
I have a little bit of a follow-on question, a follow-on comment. I wanted to just say that what I was hungry for here was a little bit more clarity on who is the appropriate authority to take actions that are being recommended. So at one point there was a remark that the highest threat is the dirty bomb, which is complicated by the AIS issue. And that it is a great statement to state that this is the greatest threat. There were a range of actions that were recommended, but it was not quite clear. For instance, when we talk about we must work with our the military must work with partners to locate the ship, or we're going to go through the UN to bring China to add the pressure. Wait, who's going to the UN and why are we going to the UN instead of using diplomatic channels? Those kinds of things. I was looking for a little more clarity on the responsible party and the authorities to bring to bear.
All right, if no judges have any further comments, I'll again open up to students for any questions back to the judges. You have about 2 minutes.
Thank you, judges. I mean, I would actually just kind of pose the same question to you guys. In this kind of a scenario, how would you engage, who would you engage with in terms of addressing the buyer of this dirty bomb? Whether it's, would you, India, Pakistan, China, like how would you guys go about it?
I heard what Kurt said about the China, and I think he liked the China option a little bit more than I did. I think the South China Sea response was somewhat persuasive. Like, we want